Hello and welcome to Wake Up Investigates with me, Sonia Poulton. Thank you for being here. It is Friday, the 22nd of August, 2025. It is exactly 9 a.m. British summertime. Can't believe we are coming very close to the end of summer. Yes, indeed, we are. I hope you are all well. Good to hear you and see you in the comments. How are you doing? How are you all doing? I hope you're all doing fantastically well. So thank you for being here. I truly, truly appreciate it. Welcome to the show that aims to dispel myths, destroy propaganda, and expose lies told by legacy media, of which I was a former person of legacy media. Today's investigation looks at a cover-up of abuse involving famous people, from pop stars and TV bigwigs to politicians and footballers. And it was controlled by this man you see on the screen, Max Clifford, most famous for being a celebrity public relations man. But in reality, he was a fixer of abuse and an enabler of it, as well as a purveyor of it. He had a substantial influence on British media that continues up to this day, which is why what I'm doing today is relevant. How are you in the comments? Can you all hear me loud and clear? Maria said, let's rock. Yes, indeed, let's rock. Good morning to you all. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate wherever you are watching us today, whether you're on the live, whether you are watching us on Rumble, X, Spotify, or indeed YouTube, whether you're watching us live or whether you're watching us on catch up. Either way, thank you so much for being here. So back to Max Clifford. As I say, he had a substantial influence on British media that continues up to this day. For decades, he shaped the UK news and celebrity coverage with compulsive lies on behalf of his frequently unsavory clients. He was a master media manipulator behind many tabloid scandals for decades. And his job was not only to get his clients coverage, but to also stop stories about them being aired. He rose to fame and wealth and notoriety. And when he was at his peak, he was untouchable, and his victims knew it. At one stage, he was more powerful than journalists, editors, and their bosses. He used his silence around his clients' and friends' sexual scandals, including the abuse of children, to blackmail them. He died in prison in 2017, convicted of being a serial sex offender of girls and young women, and known to be a man who accepted money and bribes in order to cover up for other sexual and murderous deviants. Almost certainly, some of them are still walking around today, perhaps waiting for that moment when, like Max, their deeds will catch up with them. The police like to talk about historic crimes, don't they? The thing about historic crimes is they come back to bite you. But first, let's hear directly from the man himself and how he chose to describe what it was that he did. Let me just find that video. And here he is. Have a listen.
My business is basically promotion and protection. When I started out, it was all about promotion. These days, it's far more about protection. I'll give you a good example of what I mean. Lots of many years ago, you've got to picture the scene, a beautiful house in St George's Hill, Weybridge, where there was a very rich American client, a major star, someone I'd represented for a few years. He just finished doing interviews for American television and British television and British media to promote his latest movie. Now, I knew that he was on his last warning from his wife. Next time you get caught playing around, that's it, finished, divorce, not having any more chances. So, he'd finished doing the interviews. I was downstairs on the phone, and I saw the gates, the electric gates of this particular estate opening up, and the car coming through. I recognised the car was his wife's, who we all thought was away for the weekend visiting relatives somewhere up in Scotland. By the time she got to the door, I was already upstairs By the time she got into the bedroom, where he was having research meetings with a couple of researchers on the TV programme, I was stark bollard naked in bed with the two ladies while he was in the wardrobe. She wasn't too happy to see me in the master bedroom suite. Obviously, I mean, it was a horrible thing. I had to pretend I was enjoying kissing and fondling and all those kind of terrible things that you have to do in those situations. But in those days, I was a bit younger and a lot faster than I am now. I was still playing squash and, swimming a lot. So I managed to miss most of the blows, and the insults didn't worry me too much. But she chased me out of the bedroom. I managed to grab most of my clothes as I was running out, and she chased me out of the house. By the time I'd escaped, he'd got out of the wardrobe and down the back stairs and away. Now, that saved him £50 million, which is why people pay me fortunes, and I love the work I do. Promotion and protection. And often image has got nothing to do with reality. I once sold out a theatre tour on the strength of someone eating a hamster. It didn't have a lot to do with what Freddie Starr was doing, but it made him millions of pounds.
And that, I think, tells us a lot about what we need to know about Max Clifford. So the story there, if you caught it, American movie star, he was representing, was having an affair, and wife returned, and Max Clifford pretended that it was him in bed with these two females, while the American movie star hid in the wardrobe. But it saved him millions of pounds at divorce. And as he rightly says there, quite honestly, is that he was involved in protection over promotion after a time. And that is the reality. His business was protection, as well as probably, almost certainly, procurement, but we'll get to that shortly. He rewrote the rules of public relations. A lie was as good as a real story, actually better for him, because it would protect the perpetrator and distract the unwitting masses with some made-up nonsense, like saying things like an MP, for example, excuse me, David Mellor, said that David Mellor had sex with his mistress while wearing a Chelsea Football Club strip. It wasn't true. I mean, David Mellor had an affair, but he wasn't wearing a Chelsea Football Club strip. And it wasn't true. And the truth and Max Clifford were never great friends, but it didn't matter, because he and his friends in legacy media, the same people who are still running legacy media now, were complicit. We will continue on this. Max Clifford admitted much of his role was stopping information about his clients getting into the public eye, and which also gave him leverage for future deals. And he once proudly told the Oxford Union, I'm going to quote him directly, he said, every day, every week, every month, a lot of the lies that you see in the newspapers, in the magazines, on television, on the radio are mine. Now, why does this bother me? Why does this matter to me? Because journalism, as an investigative journalist, matters to me. What has been allowed to happen to British media over the last 4 or 5 decades is absolutely abhorrent to me. And you had predators like Max Clifford absolutely at the heart of it. So, first of all, let's go back. Since in order to better understand an individual, it's always worth looking at their formative years, I feel. And let me find a picture of a younger Max. It's always good, isn't it? Just to get some kind of context on these things. Here he is. He was born Maxwell Frank Clifford on the 6th of April, 1943 in Kingston upon Thames, a couple of miles from where I'm speaking to you right now. His mother was Lillian, née Beaufy, and his father was Frank Clifford. He was the youngest by nearly 10 years of 4 children. He had 1 sister and 2 brothers. He was a war baby and a mistake, as he used to like to say. His father worked as an electrician, was frequently unemployed, gambled and drank away his wages. The family survived with the help of the grandmother and Clifford's sister. And Max Clifford is very fond of talking about how he came from really humble beginnings and how he left school with nothing. So the official story is that he left school at 15 with no qualifications. And I found nothing to suggest that that's a lie. The other part of the official story, which he used to tell with great ease. So it was obviously something that he'd rehearsed or just that it was actually true. Because the thing about the truth is, you don't need to have a good memory, right? And maybe his beginnings was the only thing that he was actually potentially truthful about. Anyway, the story goes that his first job was at the Ely department store in Wimbledon, just down the road from Kingston upon Thames. He was sacked within 4 months of being rude to a customer. Then his brother, who was involved in print unions, managed to get him a job as an editorial assistant on the Eagle. And that from there, Clifford then went on to work for the South London Press to train as a journalist. By 18, he was a trainee reporter and writing a music column for the Merton and Morden News. And it's a very similar path to my own, actually. I started off in local newspapers in London, moved into music journalism as well. And I think really what was interesting when I was researching this story is I was able to really sort of look at the different pathways that we take. I was also offered many incentives and inducements to, let's say, go on a slightly different path to the one that I chose. But you see, I'm not Max Clifford. I'm not like those people. And so it's very interesting to see what ultimately happened with him, because he chose a certain path because he was already on that path, right? So what we knew about Max Clifford from an early age was he loved the music industry. He loved the celebs. He loved the glamour. He loved the very cool London, the whole thing. He began working for EMI Records around 1962 in the press office. He liked to brag that he was somehow involved with launching the Beatles, but this was typical bluff, bluster, lies and bravado. In fact, author Hunter Davis, who became acquainted with the Beatles during the 1960s when he was working on their authorized biography, disputed the claim that Max Clifford had anything at all to do with the Beatles. Hunter Davis once said, "I have about 500 Beatles books, plus about 2,000 magazines, programs, and articles about the Beatles, yet I have not read one reference in them to Mr. Clifford's contribution." Indeed, I suspect he had absolutely nothing to do with it. He was 19 years old. The Beatles were a young band on EMI. I think Clifford was nothing more than a gopher, actually, probably doing photocopying and all stuff like that, but he liked to big himself up. And what was interesting was when I was reading his obituary, oh, how I laughed. It talked about how he loved journalism, apparently. Now, given everything I know and will share with you today, I mean, he destroyed people's faith in journalism, and the hypocrisy of that man in pride of place at his home for a very long time was a National Union of Journalists membership certificate that had been awarded to him for 40 years continuous service as part of the union. The whole hypocrisy of it makes me absolutely makes me sick. He broke all the rules of journalism. He didn't care about journalism. Journalism is about the truth. He worked in lies, and it just kind of reinforces the point about why I never ever became part of the National Union of Journalists, not least because they are gatekeepers to the truth. The organization is a gatekeeper to the truth. You have to stick within certain parameters, and he stuck within certain parameters, but when it came to public relations, NUJ have no say over public relations. Anyway, he created Max Clifford Associates, his own PR company, in 1970. He was only 27 or thereabouts. He started almost immediately because he was very good at mixing, at socializing, very good at that. And some of his earliest jobs, they were big ones. I mean, straight out of the gate, he was dealing with big names, looking after the UK press for people like Marlon Brando, Marvin Gaye, and Muhammad Ali. And over the years, he worked with some of the richest and most successful people in the public eye, as well as the dregs of society. He didn't care. Integrity was not Max Clifford's thing. Scandal and money was. He represented numerous people, including rapist Mohammed Al-Fayed, murderer O.J. Simpson, and a pregnant 12-year-old girl. And as he'd already referred to in that recording that I played earlier. He started his ascent into PR heights with the Freddie Starr lie. And for those who are unfamiliar, this was the headline: Freddie Starr ate my hamster. And this was in 1986. And Clifford, along with the Sun newspaper, Murdoch-owned Sun newspaper, concocted this headline together. Front page news, no less. Freddie Starr, for those who don't know, was a TV comedian for a very long time and a client of Max Clifford. And he had an upcoming tour coming, and but there was something else going on, and that was they were trying to suppress other allegations about Freddie Starr. So Max Clifford set to work concocting and spinning and came up with this. And this is for many people a legendary headline, even though not a jot of it is true, not a bit of it. And it turned the tour that Starr was on into an overnight sellout. The whole place just sold out. Another 12 dates were added as a consequence of this lie, this made up headline. Extra ticket sales were estimated to be around £1 million, which in 1986 was huge. So already, you know, famous people were already seeing a worth to hiring Max Clifford. Not least, he was very good at spin, and he then had very good connections with tabloid newspapers, but he wasn't adverse to lying. And what was it? What was that unsavory allegation that they wanted to get away from? Well, I suspect it was to do with abuse, because what was interesting was many years later, a judge found that Freddie Starr had indeed groped a 15-year-old girl while they were both attending a Jimmy Savile show decades ago. Mr. Justice Nichol dismissed the claim by Freddie Starr, who was suing Karine Ward. Karine Ward had gone all over the place on BBC, on ITV. She'd written on a website. She'd made an ebook making these claims about how she had been assaulted by Freddie Starr in Savile's dressing room and how he had called her a titless wonder. Now, anybody who knew of Freddie Starr could literally hear him saying that. And the judge said that she had proven that it was true that he groped her, an underage schoolgirl, and humiliated her by calling her these names. This was all in a written judgment. He dismissed all of Starr's claims because obviously Starr wanted to sue her, wanted to dismiss any claims that she had, and then ordered Starr to pay Ward's costs, estimated to be close to £1 million. Which was on top of his own legal fees. Starr, of course, is long dead, long dead, like Clifford. So I can safely say that it is highly likely that one of the stories that Clifford had worked to silence and thus deny the victim a voice was this one, and probably more. I think it's just like addiction, right? And that is, if you get a glimpse of someone's addiction, it's only the tip of the iceberg. And the same is with abuse and sexual predators. And I think what's highly likely that what we're dealing with is a nonce protecting a nonce, because said nonces were noncing together, right? If you get my drift. And the thing about Max Clifford was he had this incredible cynicism about media. Now, as someone who understands it, I get that, absolutely. But here again is where we took slightly different paths, because I worked within legacy media with the aim of hoping to change it, or at least getting out some more alternative messages, not Max Clifford. Max Clifford reasoned that newspapers lied anyway, so he might as well take advantage of that. That kind of shows you the difference between us, right? His rationale was, if the newspapers are corrupt and full of inaccuracies anyway, what's the big deal about feeding them lies? He once told a reporter, sweetheart, he always talked in those very, very kind of affectionate terms, sweetheart, it wouldn't change if I stopped doing what I'm doing. The press is the way it is, warts and imperfections. So you turn it to your advantage, make the best of it. I'm quite happy to play the role I do. And as I will continue to go deeper into this, please bear in mind the things that he was quite happy to take part in, the role he was happy to play. So the thing is, Max Clifford associates was phenomenally successful. Phenomenally successful. He was raking in millions a year, which for that period was huge, absolutely huge. And, he was not only raking in millions a year for himself, but also for his celebrity clients. So who were they? Well, probably one of his most famous and certainly his longest client, one of his longest clients has to be this man, Simon Cowell. Simon Cowell, sure many of you know him. He is, of course, formerly a music industry boss, but then he progressed to TV. He had the X Factor. He had the whole Got Talent franchise, which went all around the world. Both of them made an absolute huge amount of money. But when he met Max Clifford, he wasn't there. He wasn't there. Clifford represented Simon Cowell for over a decade and was actually credited with shaping his public image. And Cowell dropped Clifford following Clifford being convicted in 2014. More on that shortly. And these two are very close. And while Cowell paid him a small fortune, Clifford had made much more for Cowell. Let me find a video here. I'm sure I've got it here. Where he's actually talking. Here he is. Now, the audio is not great, but it's got subtitles. But here he's talking, and he's not aware that he's being filmed. But here he's talking about how much he was being paid by Simon Cowell.
Has paid me £250,000 for the last 7 years. But for a year, that's bonus and check. He's made my in the last 7 years. And I know the contribution.
Right. So what he's saying is that Cowell had paid him £250,000 a year for the last 7-8 years. And he did this in terms of introductions. He actually goes on to say here, including introductions to people like Murdoch as one example. And there is no doubt whatsoever that these two were as thick as thieves. And oftentimes Clifford liked to portray himself as something of a Svengali to Simon Cowell, and that wasn't such a stretch, actually. I remember when he first started representing Simon Cowell, and Simon Cowell wasn't obviously the Simon Cowell that you know today, but I remember when he first started representing Simon Cowell, and he'd have journalists. Clifford had an office in Bond Street, but he'd bring in Simon Cowell to his office, and he'd have journalists come in. And Simon Cowell became well known for like really high-waisted trousers. And Clifford would like parade Simon Cowell in front of these journalists and have Simon Cowell lift up his t-shirt and show how high-waisted his trousers were and his hairy chest and everything. And Cowell was quite prepared to do it then. Obviously, wouldn't do that now, but he was quite prepared to do it then. You know why? Because Simon Cowell, like all the rest of them, is a media whore. Absolutely. And you know, it was the connections, the influence, and other things, as we will see, that Simon Cowell got from the relationship. And I don't think we should underestimate at all the impact that Max Clifford had on Simon Cowell. It was absolutely substantial. Max Clifford crafted Simon Cowell to be a superstar. A media superstar, a TV superstar. That was Clifford. And I mean, Cowell was already famous with Pop Idol when he brought in Clifford, but it was Clifford who took him to the next level. That was when X Factor came about. That was when the whole Britain's Got Talent and the franchise all came about. And when Simon Cowell was asked by Piers Morgan on Piers Morgan's TV series, Tabloid Tales, Morgan said, "What was the best career decision of your life?" And Simon Cowell didn't have a problem in answering that. He said, hiring Max Clifford. Oh, yes, indeed it was. Hiring Max Clifford. So why might that be? Now, this is a picture that often surfaces of Max Clifford and Simon Cowell together. This was taken around the 5th of March, 2012. And this was them hosting a Valentine's Day tea party at the Dorchester Hotel in London. This was for families supported by the Surrey Children's Hospice Shooting Star Chase. Now, Clifford was a patron of the charity, and they are pictured here with Sean, who was supported by the charity. Cowell said, "I've got to know many of the children there. For example, Sean will often text just to tell me what a great day she's had at Chase." And as you will see, Max Clifford did the Jimmy Savile thing, and that is he surrounded himself and his involvement with charities. You know, that gives that sheen of this is a good person. It's the halo sheen, isn't it? But I want to show you some more footage. I think this is so interesting. Also, please note today, you shouldn't get any ads. This is not monetized today, simply because of the nature of this investigation. There is no point monetizing it. Absolutely no point whatsoever. And so I didn't even bother from the outset, because I don't want to censor myself on what I have to say and what I have to report here. So just to say that. So hopefully we should just be clean all the way through. So let me show you this. This is a very interesting TV clip and very insightful indeed. And what this actually tells us is what was really in part going on behind the scenes. Now, let me give you a little bit of background first of all. So this is This Morning, ITV show I worked on for 10 years. Eventually, the disgrace, Philip Schofield had to leave after having some sort of relationship with a young lad who was a junior on the staff and who Philip Schofield had met. And we don't know when he had met the young boy. But Schofield had always maintained that it was legal. So, but why would you hide it if it was legal, love? Anyway, by the by. But eventually, Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby, they both kind of left in disgrace. Holly Willoughby tried to cling on, but everybody knew that she knew too much. But this is interesting because this is actually when Tom Boyer, who is somebody who writes a lot of autobiographies and has done a lot of stuff into like the royal family and certainly to do with Meghan and Harry. And I don't always agree with him. I think he's very slimy and creepy. But he had written a book in which he had access to Simon Cowell, and in which it was revealed that Simon Cowell and Danny Minogue, Kylie Minogue's younger sister, had a relationship for a period of time, and they'd both hidden it. And this is Max Clifford on the line to the people at This Morning, and listen to what he has to say. I think it is really interesting. Let me just check I've got the right one here.
So Max, do you feel that now that the seal has been broken in a way, that it's almost
No, I want to come back to that. This is the one. Let's check this one first.
The story with Danny Minogue, and we don't know whether this is not true. I mean, it's reported in this book as if this is a true story. This is a story that you have tried to keep out of the press yourself.
Well, I did keep it out of the press myself for a long, long time, along with a lot of other stories.
And did you keep it out under the press under Simon's instruction?
No, I did it because I thought it was in his best interest. You know, I've been involved with Simon for 10 years, and obviously you make your own decisions on these things. But I think that both of them, you know, didn't want it to come out. So I was happy to
keep it
do
away.
my best to make sure it didn't happen. And up until the book, it didn't happen.
So hasn't the book has undermined the work that you have done together to keep these stories out of the press when now they couldn't be more in them?
You know, you've got one or two stories. There's 100 you haven't got, and hopefully you won't have. But
so there's 100 stories on Simon Cowell that we didn't get, but we got this poxy, pathetic Simon Cowell and Danny Minogue had a fling. And that really is a very good indicator, because it was that sort of just sop, absolute sop that has been fed to us for a very long time, while the 100 of other stories was being kept hidden from us. And I think we all have to wonder what they could be. But this is where I think it also starts to get interesting, because one of the reasons that this was a rare occasion when Clifford had started to lose grip over Simon Cowell. And so Simon Cowell, as I say, had given access to Tom Boyer, and then these various stories had come out. And this is very interesting because really the reason that Clifford was absolutely furious was because, as he said, this had now opened up a whole doorway and was open season. Check out what he says. This is so interesting.
And also, Max, do you feel that now that the seal has been broken in a way, that it's almost sort of the lift has been raised and all these other things will suddenly come out? Do you worry that it starts the ball rolling?
Well, of course, it's open season now. I had yesterday 6 different girls contact my office who supposedly had relationships with Simon Cowell. I'm sure that loads of girls will be contacting newspapers, many of whom have probably never even met him or just had a picture taken with him. But, that's inevitable, and that would happen because of the Tomboya book. The difference is he shouldn't have spoken to him, in my opinion, because that's given it, if you like, credibility from his own mouth, oxygen. And that would upset Danny and everybody else.
Just wondering why those girls needed a book to go to the papers in the first place.
It makes it easier, Philip. That's the way the system works. Ask Carol, she knows.
I will. Max, thank you very much indeed.
And we will ask Carol shortly. But it was interesting that Philip Schofield was so dismissive of the women who contacted Max. But then, as I say, he was hiding the fact that he was gay. And rather than being a full-on happily married husband, was actually behaving inappropriately with a young studio junior and would eventually be forced to resign. So see how dismissive they are. A lot of these people, they just dealt with the younger people who wanted to get into the industry as chattel to be dismissed, of no great consequence. And Max Clifford certainly did. And we will turn shortly to Carol Malone, who is absolutely emblematic of scum media, tends to mostly appear these days on GB News and the Jeremy Vine show these days. But Max Clifford knew Carol Malone. And as I said, towards the end of this, I will play you what Carol Malone has to say. So what's interesting is he's saying, you've got 1 or 2 stories, but there's hundreds you haven't got. And he was absolutely indignant at his role having been exposed. And the thing about him, he even though he was covering up for his clients, he could be incredibly indiscreet as well. He was probably narcissistic in many respects. And this was far from the first time, by the way, that he had made admissions of hiding problematic secrets. And you'll see what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Max Clifford. You'll see what I'm talking about again towards the end of this investigation. And I want to refer briefly to a very famous story doing the rounds, okay? It's on YouTube. They call it the Simon Cowell and Max Clifford Buffet. But there is no proof that Simon Cowell was actually involved. However, let me tell you about this. Gavin Bain was a music industry insider. He was one half of the kind of like pretend rap duo, Syllabill, Syllabill and Brains. That's it. And Gavin gave an interview in which he talked about being at Stringfellows. Now, Peter Stringfellow infamously ran his club in Covent Garden for many, many years, and it was an absolute den of iniquity. Horrible, horrible stuff went on there. I mean, it was a lot of there was like topless dancing and everything, but it was just really horrible stuff. And they had private secret rooms. So this part is interesting. So what Gavin was saying was that when he was in the music industry, he went to a kind of like industry event that was held at Stringfellows. He bumped into a guy from Island Records. He said it was a really cool dude, and he ran after him into Stringfellows. And the guy seemed surprised that Gavin was there, and they went into a separate room, and the guy asked him if he was going to the buffet. And Gavin was kind of like looking around, and he said he saw all these guys, guitar techs, people who were trying to get in the industry. He saw another guy who he thought was underage there, saw other people he had seen at industry showcases. And then there was this other area, and he was like, what's going on over there then? Let me see if I can bring in an image of Gavin, which would obviously help. Let's just see if I can just bring him in. And just bear with. I wonder if I have it. Here he is. There he is. Let's just see what he looks like. Here you go. And so he was like, what's going on there then? What's over there in that corner? And he said that there were young people, there were young girls, there were young guys, maybe even as young as 13 or 14. He said that the clothes that the girls were wearing were completely inappropriate. These were very young girls, 13, 14. They had see-through tots where you could see their young breasts, and Gavin was really confused. And one of the people around, because the thing is about these sort of gatherings, is the people in them really know each other because they've learned to trust each other because they're all into the same thing, right? But Gavin was an outsider, and there was this guy who had kind of been watching him, and he said to Gavin, "You shouldn't be here." And clearly he shouldn't. And Gavin was like, what the hell is going on here? And now the prior conversation that he'd had with the guy from Island Records, when the guy was from Island Records was like, "Well, what are you doing here?" Well, la 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 la, all that sort of stuff. And that is because they recognize each other. And Gavin was an outsider. Gavin had got in because he was going to an industry event at Stringfellows, and he'd followed this guy into a room. Basically, he said he was really freaked out. I left. I saw people like big agents who were on TV shows talking about management, and he seemed to recall seeing Max Clifford there, and he found out that it was called Cowell and Clifford's, he found out that it was Cowell and Clifford's regular do, and it was called the buffet. He said he didn't see Simon there, but that is a very famous story that is doing the rounds on YouTube. Now, I don't know if it's true, and I am certainly not reporting it as fact. I am saying Gavin Bain claims this happened, and this is what he was told about it. However, what I am absolutely claiming as fact is Simon Cowell is a disgusting human being who, with the backing of Max Clifford, did all they could to expand the boundaries of what was acceptable for so-called family viewing on TV, without catching too many problems from broadcast regulator Ofcom. His X Factor and Britain's Got Talent, which obviously, as I say, was extended all around the world, often pushed adult entertainment onto an audience that was largely comprised of children. And over the years, I became increasingly horrified at what apparently passed as family entertainment. Should we have a little look at what passed as family entertainment? Here's an example of Lady Gaga on the X Factor doing her satanic best. And look at all the writhing and the sexuality that's going on there as well. Check it out. You can just see it. I don't think there's a sound to this, but you can see obviously all the imagery, satanic imagery that's going on there. And oops, suddenly stopped. Why is it suddenly stopped? Let me just see let me see if I can just bring that back to life. Probably not. Probably because even my production unit is rejecting what's going on. But anyway, they were pretending to fornicate on stage. It was just horrible. It was completely inappropriate family viewing. And that went all across the board, including, anybody remember when Pussycat Dolls used to come on? That was also really repugnant. Let's see if I can just bring that in briefly as well. Again, extremely highly, and I am not a Christian, right? I'm just telling you that I've watched and observed and reported on the sexualization of children for a very long time, and it's the normalization of this sort of stuff, very satanic, very over sexualized, that has crept in at the hands of people like Simon Cowell, Louis Walsh, and their handler Max Clifford. And that was going on. So even just based on that, without all the other stuff that I'm going to tell you shortly about Simon Cowell, even just based on that, I know he's an absolutely repugnant person. Then, of course, there was that for many years, obviously, until Max Clifford was eventually caught, he was a protector of Simon Cowell. He's already told us there's 100 stories you don't know about Simon Cowell, right? But once Max Clifford had been, arrested, imprisoned, and then died, Simon Cowell was kind of exposed to a certain degree. And I think this clip really shows a lot of how exposed Simon Cowell was, quite literally. This was a car journey in 2019. Simon Cowell is arriving at auditions for Britain's Got Talent. I've played this before, but it seems absolutely appropriate to play it again now. So he's arriving in this vehicle, and I'm just going to give you the heads up so you know what to look out for. And he gets out of the car and he sees all the assembled press. Now, he knew the press would be there, surely. So for him to get out in such a state of disarray, and you see a young female get out the other side. But Simon gets out and he's like, oh my God, my flies are undone. And you know something has taken place in the back of that vehicle. Just check this out. This is Simon Cowell in the Raw.
Is it good to have Anne back?
Simon, how do you feel about having the boys back together?
Me and David.
You and David, what about Ant and Dec, having them both back?
Is that?
Yes.
No, he's not.
How is it seeing them both back working back together again?
I've seen them, yeah.
You haven't seen them yet, okay.
No.
How pleased are you that they are going to be working?
Of course, yeah, I missed them. It'll be fun. Now I feel drifting. You have no idea what's coming.
And that tells you right there the complicity of mainstream media, because listen to their stupid questions. Simon, how do you feel about having the boys back together? Talking about Ant and Dec, like completely take it over to celebrity gossip. Whereas somebody should have said, Simon, your flies are undone. What has been going on in the back of that car? Now, I don't know that young woman, although I have wider footage which shows who she is. I would suggest something rather untoward took place there, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if in the future there is a lawsuit pertaining to that. Somebody who said, I worked for him and this is what he forced me to do, right? That would not surprise me at all. I don't believe that he just had his flies undone for no damn good reason. I don't. Sue me, Simon Cowell, because it made me absolutely sick, the complicity of mainstream media right there. They distracted it over to Ant and Dec and David Walliams, another creep that Simon Cowell had, you know, working with him until he was exposed. These are creepy people all gathered together. So I thought that's always remained interesting for me, always. So there's loads of unanswered questions, really, including what the hell was Simon Cowell doing in the back of that car? Simon Cowell has long been a disgusting human being, and Clifford covered for it. These are facts. There was that time that Simon Cowell donated £90,000 to the IDF, the Israeli army. And, you know, I mean, what more can you say? What more can you say? And it's because he's a Zionist, right? A Zionist. And also there was that time when he famously gave £50,000 to Jonathan King when he was on bail accused of sexually abusing young boys. Jonathan King was for many years a celebrity DJ. And it was said that he ran child sex rings for the stars, that it was like a VIP club for perverts. And Simon Cowell gave him £50,000 when he was on bail. And when he was convicted, Simon Cowell said, I really regretted it. You know, I thought he was innocent, blah, blah, blah. And King's career in the music industry effectively ended in 2001 when he was convicted of sexually abusing 5 teenage boys. He has denied all of this at length. But that's kind of like the type of people who gathered together. I find that interesting. And so back on to some of Max Clifford's other clients, and interesting stuff. One of the people that he represented was James Hewitt. Do you remember James Hewitt? James Hewitt obviously had an affair with Diana, Harry and William's mum. And Clifford, for many years, of course, as we've said, was behind many of the scandals that hit the headlines. And in his memoir, he wrote that he had been hired by James Hewitt to keep him and Princess Diana out of the papers. And he also claimed that Hewitt had confided in him that their affair had started 2 years before the birth of Prince Harry. Now, the elephant in the room has long been that Prince Harry looks strikingly similar to James Hewitt. This is the reality. He does look similar to James Hewitt, and many people have often thought that Harry is James Hewitt's son. And that certainly might explain why Harry has found it easy to a degree to be estranged from his father, Charles. Maybe not. The thing about Max Clifford, and I find absolutely reprehensible about these people, is that Clifford claimed that he was doing all these things for a higher purpose. He said there was a higher purpose to the kind of kiss and tell sex scoops that he sold. For instance, he claimed he was a socialist, right? That was one of the things he claimed because of his background, right? Very working class. He claimed he was a socialist. He claimed to hate the hypocrisy that circulated around the Conservative government in the 90s. He often exposed the hypocrisy of John Major. Do you remember John Major's family values campaign while he was having an affair with, loudmouth Edwina Currie, one of his MPs. And Max Clifford liked to think that he helped to bring down the government. But the thing is, Max Clifford, if it had been so, the aim was to do this for the right, to do this for the good, that's all well and good. But he was hiding predators. So he was very selective on what perverts and predators that he wanted the public to know about. And the media went along with it. The media absolutely went along with it. And then there was that time when he represented Mark Kennedy. Do you remember Mark Kennedy? Mark Kennedy was one of those horrible, disgusting spy cops. Those cops who infiltrated campaigning and activists and activism. And, some had children with these women. Mark Kennedy was particularly absolutely foul and disgusting. But Clifford loved that story because to him, it was like, it was broadsheet heaven. Because even though he was a permanent fixture of the tabloids, he had more difficulty getting in the broadsheets, the so-called, kind of higher intellect newspapers like, the Telegraph and the Guardian and the Observer and those sort of things, broadsheets, as opposed to the tabloid. And so he saw the Mark Kennedy story as wonderful broadsheet fodder because it involved corrupt cops. He loved all that and, kind of like sex, drugs and rock and roll, really. And the other people that he got involved with, absolutely reprehensible. So I cannot buy this whole idea that he saw a higher purpose, a higher calling to the work that he did, because the other people that he got involved with were the reprobates who were accused of murdering dear Stephen Lawrence. And 5 men, they were suspected of killing Stephen Lawrence. Several of them have since been jailed. And he said, no, I didn't actually represent them. I just helped them, put them in touch with media, including at the time, disgraced TV journalist Martin Bashir. You remember the one who misled and lied to Diana prior to the interview with her, and also did the infamous TV interview with Michael Jackson. So Max Clifford was like, I didn't represent them. I just put them in touch with, listen, if somebody, there's the only thing that I would do with those 5, and actually it was probably 6, but the 6th one managed to escape public gaze. The only thing that I would do with those 6 is not pee on them if they were on fire. Is not pee on them if they were on fire. Let them go to hell. They killed a young lad, and let them go to hell. They should never. He tried to give them some kind of, sheen of respectability, as if it was a respectable news story. They were murderers, murderous racists, and he supported them. But he never seemed to have a problem with murderers anyway. He once represented O.J. Simpson. And he said that both for the Stephen Lawrence, alleged murderers, and O.J. Simpson, that he received death threats. So what? Death threats for representing murderers, that seems like a fair trade-off to me. He also infamously represented this rapist. And the thing is, Clifford hid many grubby secrets, including his client's love of abusing young girls and women. At one stage, he represented former Harrods boss, Mohammed Al Fayed, the man whose son was with Princess Diana when they died in the Paris car crash. See how it all kind of joins together, right? It's like these are small worlds that they're all in. And in recent years, of course, Mohammed Al Fayed has been accused of multiple sex attacks on women. He's now dead. People say, why wait until he died to report him? But you see, that's not what happened. He was repeatedly reported when he was alive and by multiple young women. But it also turned out that police forces, including the Metropolitan Police, repeatedly failed to act. I'm sure it's nothing to do with Mohammed Al Fayed's big connections and privileges and favors, or the fact that Fayed sent Harrods, which he owned, Christmas hampers to police bosses. I'm sure him escaping justice while he was alive had absolutely nothing to do with any kind of blackmail or bribery whatsoever, she says, with her tongue firmly implanted in her cheek. And Clifford and Fayed eventually parted company, and it was all a bit messy. And it was claimed that it was to do with Tories Christine and Neil Hamilton. And but it actually wasn't. Clifford had a problem, he said, working with Al Fayed's disciples. Not quite sure who that one would have been. He said that Fayed wanted him to work full-time at Harrods and Fulham, Fayed owned Fulham Football Club. Clifford said, I was not prepared to do that, but he didn't rule working with Al Fayed in the future, even though he knew then who Mohammed Al Fayed was. He absolutely 100% knew. 100% knew. And I'm going to show you some old footage which surfaced for a BBC documentary recently called Al Fayed Predator at Harrods. And it captures Clifford boasting that he covered up for Mohammed Al Fayed back then. Let me play this to you. Let me just find it. Oh, where have we got here? Just bear with me, beautiful people. I know I have it somewhere. Let me just see where it is in here. You know what it's like when you're working through it, but I do. Here we go. Clifford. So here he is. Now, this is interesting. Again, this is footage that he wasn't really aware was being taken. And it's interesting stuff. But hear what he has to say. Oh, the sound's not coming. So he's saying about Mohammed Al Fayed, he's 76, going on 18 when it comes to the young girls. He's a randy old sod. Fine. So I stop this, stop that, whatever. But one of the many things he does is to give me £250,000 a year to the Chase Hospice. I'm a patron of it. All works extremely well. So you think, let me say that, if he's groping 17-year-olds that are quite willing, right, okay, so because they're being paid a lot of money, then fine, right. So the gist of that, of course, is that Mohammed Al Fayed paid Max Clifford $250,000 a year, actually the exact same amount that Simon Cowell paid him. How interesting. So Al Fayed paid him $250,000 a year, and to a children's charity, right? And I don't doubt for a second that he also paid Clifford separately as well. And that's children's charity that he was patron of. So again, it looked like, well, even though I'm covering up for him, and at least that money's going to charity. He always wanted to look like he was like purer than pure, but you're covering up for a predator. Okay. Absolutely disgusting stuff. And so, in that clip, as I say, he's heard describing the billionaire Al Fayed, who has been accused now of raping multiple women when they were girls. And, that this whole idea that he's a 76-year-old, but going on 18 when it comes to the ladies, he's a randy old sod. This whole kind of like, oh, it's okay to be like that. Let me tell you something. If he was some broke 76-year-old, right, who was on the street corner getting drunk, Clifford would not be happy that he was a randy old sod touching up young girls. This is about power. This is about power and influence, getting away with it. And it's so very, very wrong. And again, it is clear that as long as it wasn't his own daughter Louise, more about which later, because Clifford was absolutely devoted to his daughter Louise, who, poor Louise, actually had suffered from a very young age. She'd got like youthful arthritis from the age of 7. She had to have her knees replaced before she was even 16. Really very, very sad stuff. But Max Clifford traded on that as well. He used her, even though there was this whole idea that he wouldn't, discuss it or anything. That's a lie, because I'm going to show you a picture shortly where he has a newspaper article where it's about him and his daughter. But anyway, the point was, it was clear. It's absolutely clear to me, researching this, that as long as it wasn't his own daughter, Clifford didn't care about other young girls who were abused. He saw them as disposable. He saw them as toys for rich old men that he hid secrets for. There were multiple women who have now come forward, including many who worked for Al Fayed, accusing him of rape and sexual assault. Compensation schemes have been set up. Some of these women, and I interviewed at least one of them, were actually sent to have these private intrusive medical examinations for Mohammed Al Fayed and his mates. And it was to check that these girls didn't have anything before they were interfered with or before they were raped by Al Fayed and co. And there was a practice along Harley Street that was seeing these young girls. It's really disgusting stuff. And what he says about Fayed in that clip is really key to what's going on here. Because one of the ways, as I say, that Clifford blackmailed his clients was through the use of charity. And he was saying one of the many things he does is 250,000 a year to the Chase Hospice that I am a patron of. It all works extremely well. So you are a patron of a charity for children, but you are allowing children, because to me, a 14-year-old is a child. 13-year-olds, 13, 14, 15, 16, they're still children, right? But you are allowing the abuse of children as long as you get paid money that then goes to the charity. That's not right. That's absolutely not right. And so that clip was actually taken from this kind of documentary that actually aired in 2008 called Starsuckers. And then it was repackaged most recently for this expose to do with Mohammed Al-Fayed, who was actually 94 when he died in London, and I think 2 years ago now. This quote says so much. What he says here says so much. He saw victims as taking a trade-off for being abused, and he ignored the power that people like Mohammed Al-Fayed had, because Clifford himself knew that he was an abuser, and he was using his associations with rich, famous people to enable his abuse. When Clifford died in, when Clifford was actually asked if what he was saying could be interpreted as Al-Fayed paying off his victims, he said, and I don't know if you caught it, he said, well, in that situation, if he's groping 17-year-olds that are quite willing because they're being paid a lot of money, fine. And that was the attitude, right? Is the problem is, and I've talked about it extensively on Wake Up, and having been a music journalist and being around the music and entertainment industry, I see what absolute scumbags there are who are willing to take advantage of young people who are desperate to get a leg up the fame ladder. And it really breaks my heart that, parents and carers allow young people to be so unprotected. We've seen it over and over and over again. Whatever you think, for example, about Michael Jackson, there is no denying that various parents allowed Michael Jackson to have actually intimate and inappropriate relationships with children, even though Michael Jackson denied all of that. And there is a great deal of question marks over it. But nonetheless, his fame was enough for parents to allow their children to sleep in bed with him. And that's often what happens. The other thing about Clifford's clients as well, which was interesting at the time, I think it's very much a kind of mark of that time that we were living through, is he had quite a body of clients who were gay, and they were hiding that, because the thing is, in public life, when he was certainly around the 80s and 90s, it was still problematic, believe it or not, to be gay. Certainly when it came to like pop stars who were very much, certainly male pop stars, were crafted on this whole idea that they were being sold to teenage girls. Well, no teenage girl wants to know that their favorite pop star likes boys. Right. So that couldn't work. So they had to conceal that. And then there was also a lot of footballers as well, certainly in the Premier League. And because footballing was very homophobic, and it was seen as, you have to be very masculine. And this whole idea that you couldn't be gay and masculine obviously is just outdated and ludicrous, ridiculous. But so he had quite a body of gay people that he was hiding that they were gay and feeding out other stories about them. Now, I don't believe that anybody should be outed. I believe that it is entirely down to the person whether they choose to announce to the world that they are gay, bi, or whatever, right? I think that's entirely down to the person, because they have to live with the repercussions of it. So I've never supported any newspaper articles that do this or anything like that. So if there's one thing at all that Max Clifford and I would ever agree on, is that while I wouldn't be prepared to lie about someone's sexuality, I can see some value in protecting, because, a lot of the newspapers were really scandalous and prurient around anybody that they detected as being gay. It was a horrible climate. You almost had to be there in order to be able to understand how awful it was. So on that, like, the only thing that I probably agreed with that he did to a certain degree, but not hugely, because he was also hiding probably gay predators, almost certainly. He said that none of his clients have been outed, that he'd managed to keep hidden every single one of his gay clients. But the thing is, this is where it got interesting for me, is because that in itself tells you something about his power, because there were people involved with him, obviously, very, very powerful people, just like Jimmy Savile, very powerful people. And for a lot of his gay clients, the very threat that they could be outed at any time would be powerful tools to blackmail them with. And we know that happened for a very long time. I've covered that in my film, Paedophiles in Parliament. That was happening to politicians, to lords. The threat of being exposed as being gay was enough to blackmail them into all manner of unconscionable things. All manner of unconscionable things. And the thing is about Max Clifford is that his clientele pentacles spread far and wide. He even at one stage worked with Beyonce. He was doing some work for her. And so, it wasn't just about kind of, British artists or politicians. He was kind of massive worldwide. I mean, although he was British, based in London, still he was taking care of, as we saw at the beginning with his Max Clifford Associates, he was taking care of a lot of overseas clients, such as Beyonce, Marlon Brando, O.J. Simpson, and taking care of their UK press to keep them safe. One of the other really unconscionable, disgusting things that he was caught saying was when he was talking about Alan Clark. Do you remember Alan Clark? Alan Clark was a Tory MP, a repugnant, disgusting man who slept with a mother and her 2 daughters. The whole thing blew up. Alan Clark reveled in being a predator. He reveled in it. He wrote the Alan Clark Diaries, which is why I kind of laugh when people always these days, because people without a sense of history about what's gone on in politics, they go, oh, Labour is the party of paedophiles. Get a grip. Believe me when I say paedophilia within the British establishment is not aligned or attached with any party. The Conservatives for many years was a hotbed of paedophilia, and Margaret Thatcher was something of a ringmaster for these paedophiles. So what was interesting, Max Clifford was representing Alan Clark. He was filmed talking about Alan Clark, and again he revealed his true disdain of the young girls. Now bear in mind, Alan Clark had raped the daughters, because when you're underage, this is not sex. You cannot consent to having sex when you're underage. So Alan Clark was a rapist, and this is what Max Clifford had to say about it.
I mean, the only thing about it that they made a lot of money out of it. He'd used them, so they wanted to make money out of it and had a moan, so they did. He enjoyed it. He sold even more books. The only slightly serious side about it was that he'd actually interfered with those girls from the age of 14.
The only slightly serious thing about it is he'd actually interfered with those girls from the age of 14. Only slightly serious. Again, Max Clifford would not apply those same rules to his own daughter. No, he wouldn't. And there were other revelations in that conversation, which I will play shortly. And Alan Clark, absolutely disgusting, a paedophile, a rapist. And that is the most that his PR can say. Only slightly serious. Absolutely disgusting. The family was Valerie Josephine and Alison Harkess. And Max Clifford's attitude in that conversation, which you can find online, was, well, the family got publicity. They were fighting over getting publicity. Alan Clark loved the publicity. Absolutely ignoring the fact that at the heart of this were 2 raped young girls. Astonishing. Like, the immorality is sort of beyond belief for me. I find it really hard to kind of fathom. Anyway, he didn't always manage to escape problems. He actually lost a couple of lawsuits. One of them was to do with Christine and Neil Hamilton, because there'd been the whole issue to do with Christine and Neil Hamilton and Mohammed Al-Fayed and the Cash for Questions. And then Max Clifford represented a woman who claimed that she'd been sexually abused, a lie, by Neil and Christine Hamilton. Well, it was found to be a lie. And they won a defamation lawsuit against him for pushing that. But the other person who won a defamation lawsuit against him was Paul Burrell. You remember Diana's former right-hand man. And in 2016, a judge awarded Burrell who was actually a former client of Max Clifford. Paul Burrell is really the same, right? Just somebody who's just traded endlessly on being, a confidant of Diana. Okay. These people all move in the same scum bucket. Let us not forget that. But in 2016, a judge awarded awarded Paul Burrell just £5,000 damages after Burrell had sued Clifford because Burrell had said that Clifford had forwarded private material in a fax to Rebecca Brooks at News of the World in 2002. Rebecca Brooks, another piece of scum, absolutely. Rupert Murdoch's right-hand woman for a very long time. Very involved in the whole phone hacking thing, but a top dog at News International, Rupert Murdoch's media conglomerate. And so, Max Clifford didn't always escape telling his lies or his repugnant behavior. He didn't always. But obviously the great riches that he gained as a consequence of his work was quite phenomenal. I wonder if I've got some imagery here that I'd like to show you. Let me just bring this in. And so Max Clifford always, as I said earlier, he prided himself on this whole idea that he'd come from incredibly humble beginnings and he had worked his way up. And he'd made a fortune, and it's true, he had come from humble beginnings as well. This was his house, his final house. He was incredibly proud of rising up from a terraced house in Kingston upon Thames. And he eventually owned at least 2 houses in the millionaire's private oasis in Burwood Park in Weybridge. It's a private residential and woodland estate in the heart of Surrey. Again, probably about a 15-20 minute drive from here. It is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And he shared this house with his partner, Joe, after leaving the former family home to his daughter Louise after his wife had died with cancer. And Burwood Park, it's an elite residence, and it's one of those places where what happens in Burwood Park stays in Burwood Park. We're talking 350 acres, a private estate, gated entrances, CCTV everywhere. These are people with secrets. Okay, the first mention of Burwood in historical records appears as around about 962 AD when King Henry VIII purchased it. He converted it into a deer park, and deer still run around there as they do around here. This is very much southwest, Greater London, going into Surrey is very much deer territory. And Max Clifford, again, trying to appear like he was, such a down-to-earth bloke. And part of his charm was his affability. People found him very relatable. They didn't feel that he had kind of delusions of grandeur or anything. But that was also part of the act, that he managed to make it seem as if he was very down-to-earth. But he said about living in Burwood, he said, having both houses in a gated community wasn't planned or anything to do with wanting any extra privacy. We just fell in love with the park. The gates mean you don't get lorries thundering past. So you see the way he immediately makes it relatable. The gates mean you don't get lorries thundering past. Well, we all can relate to that, can't we? But the truth is, he did want it for extra privacy because God knows what went on. I'm sure that there may come a time when we will find out more about that estate with its gated entrances and multiple CCTV. But he loved those houses and that area, and he would often play golf up the road at St. George's Golf Club, which is a golf club where famous people gathered together, including John Lennon and Elton John, a place where deals were made while the powerful men enjoyed a bit of R&R. And then, of course, great luxury. And it's a wonderful house. I mean, wonderful. And do you know what? I have no problems with people working hard, working their way up. Love all that. Great, great stuff. But not on the backs of hiding the abuse of vulnerable people or hiding any abuse. No, that is not acceptable. But then, of course, on 6th of December 2012, his life of extreme privilege, corruption, abuse, all came crashing down. All came crashing down. Oh, yes, indeed it did. He was arrested at his home by the Metropolitan Police on suspicion of sexual offences. The arrest was part of Operation Yewtree. Operation Yewtree had been set up by the Metropolitan Police in the wake of the Jimmy Savile abuse scandal, and eventually had convictions from a number of high-profile TV entertainers, including Stuart Hall and Rolf Harris. Well, on the night of 6th of December 2012, Operation Yewtree arrived at the door of Max Clifford. And on that night, he was taken to a central London police station for questioning. It was 2 alleged offences, but this was only the start. This was only the start. I want to tell you a little bit about one of the first people to report Max Clifford. It was this lady. Now, we don't actually know her name, but what she did was she was prepared to part waive her anonymity. This is a picture of her when she was 20 years old, but she called herself Kathy Johnson. But she had met him when she was just 15. And what happened was it was her who initiated the original charges against Max Clifford. She met him in the summer of 1977 on holiday with her parents at a continental hotel in Torremolinos, Spain. She was 15. She was an unworldly girl. She was a virgin, and she was the daughter of a sales director and his wife, a civil servant. She had an older sister, and the family lived in a comfortable house in southwest London. They met Max. Parents got talking to him around the pool one day. They could all kind of relate. They were all coming from a similar part of the world. And he said he was there accompanying a singer. And Kathy, not her real name, but her real image, said I was 15. He was in his 30s. So to me, he was a middle-aged man. My parents spoke to him a couple of times. He suggested we contact him when we got back to the UK to discuss work opportunities, maybe some modelling. So by the time that they had returned, Kathy had all but forgotten about Max Clifford. She was a 15-year-old. And she wasn't an actor. She wasn't interested in that. That was not where she was going. But then a couple of weeks later, she received a call from a man calling himself Terry Miller. And the prosecution eventually discovered was Max Clifford. And this Terry Miller, he said he was a showbiz agent who'd seen her name on a list of people that Max Clifford had made. And did I realize what he said to Kathy? And do you realize how important Max Clifford is? This gives you an insight into the psychopathy of Max Clifford, that even though powerful, he's already gearing up to be a very powerful representative of famous people, but he's met a 15-year-old and he wants her. And so what he does is he fakes this call that he's somebody else telling this girl that how powerful Max Clifford is. This is psychopathic behavior. Anyway, what happened? He said he said, you know, you really should go and see Max Clifford. So she had a conversation with her mother about Clifford, and she made an appointment to see him. She said, I was very nervous. I was a very unconfident girl, and I didn't think I was particularly pretty. And she got to his office, and he told her that he could make her Britain's answer to Jodie Foster. Jodie Foster was huge in the 70s. And Kathy was like, but I can't act. And Clifford actually said to her, the rubbish, absolute rubbish, anyone can act. And then he kind of cut to the chase with her. He said, take your top off. And Kathy, 15 years old, and she's come along there. She's 15 years old. She's vulnerable, right? And why wasn't her mum or her dad with her? That's what I want to know, but that's probably a whole other story for a whole other time. But because they'd met Clifford and they thought he was a decent person, I suppose. Anyway, Kathy hesitated, didn't want to take off her top. And Clifford was like, you're being ridiculous. You're being childish. This is absolutely normal. This is how it works in the film industry. Your body needs to be looked over. I need to assess it. Anyway, she reluctantly took off her top. Then Clifford persuaded her to take off her bra. He made some derogatory comments about the size of her breasts. But he said, oh, but it's fine. It's absolutely fine. But she was in no doubt that this was apparently normal practice for any young person wanting to enter the entertainment industry. And you see young people now, they'll do anything, won't they, to be famous, a lot of young people. And it was no different back then. And this is why a lot of abuse has been allowed to take place. And I'm not blaming the victim for the abuse, but the problem is these predators take advantage of the keenness that these young people have to be famous. And it really breaks my heart. And what happened was that first meeting was essentially the start of 4 months of sexual abuse at the hands of Clifford, abusing Kathy. And, you know, again, people could be like, well, why does she keep going back and everything? The same old thing. She thought it was normal behavior. She was, bear in mind, she was a virgin, so she was very inexperienced. And by now he had promised her the moon. And I suppose whether she was interested in acting or not, what 15-year-old's head is not going to be turned by that? And they knew that. These predators knew that. But what happened was in 2012, she heard him pontificating about how he hated child abusers. And she finally had enough. And that was when she went and reported him to the police. And what actually happened was it then prompted a total of 23 women to come forward, though the trial involved charges relating to only 7 of them. And what was interesting was when he was eventually convicted, Kathy was in the public gallery at Southwark Crown Court with her sister. She watched as he was jailed for 8 years for 8 counts of indecent assault. And it was the first time that she'd seen him in more than 35 years. And I hear a lot what people have to say about this whole issue of people claiming they were abused decades ago. And people still don't get it, why it takes so long. But the reality is, as it was discussed in court, which I'll get to shortly, but she absolutely felt at the time that this was normal behavior if you want to get into the entertainment industry, because these predators like Max Clifford, they made it normalized. They were like, well, you're not going to take off your top. Don't be silly. You're just being ridiculous. Come on now. I have to assess you. This is part of the job. That's how it worked. And don't think for a second I have not encountered predators like that when I was a young girl. Okay. I remember one encounter once in Stringfellows, actually, going back to Stringfellows, which was an industry do. I was very young. I was a young music journalist. I must have been, I don't know, 22, 23. And I remember some industry executives sitting down at the table with me and my friends. They were offering to buy us drinks. And so we were not that young then, 23, but even I was a bit like, wow, you know, and I knew these people were industry executives, not public figures, but industry executives with some power. But I was like, I'm not interested. But I remember one of my friends going off with one of these industry executives that night. And because that's the way it goes, that's the way it often went. Not for people like me, but a lot of people who are really, really desperate for fame. Anyway, I want to play a video of him the morning after he's been arrested. I think this says a lot about his relationship with the media and the arrogance that he also carried. Here it is. This is really insightful. Have a listen.
You carrying on as normal, Max?
Yeah, it's business as normal. You know, I've said exactly my thoughts and my feelings. So, you know, obviously that's where it is.
How's the last 24 hours been?
Not very good, not very nice, as you would imagine. Very distressing. And for my family, for my wife Jo, for my daughter Louise, for everyone that knows me and cares. It's a horrible experience, but you have to face up to these things.
And how will you spend the next few weeks? And we know that you have to answer that.
I'll spend the next few weeks. I mean, I think I'm speaking at a charity thing on Monday. I'm speaking at a charity thing on Tuesday. And I'll be working as I always do. So trying to make things as normal as I possibly can in the circumstances.
Can you give us any detail about the allegations? Can you say any more about the nature of them?
No, I can't. All I can say is that they're totally without any foundation and they're totally untrue. And I think one was in 77 and the other one was a few years afterwards, I think. Different, but totally without any foundation at all.
Max, you look very upset on the steps of the...
Sorry?
You look very upset and quite shocked on the steps of the police station last night.
Well, no, I mean, I've been there about 12 hours, sitting in cells and, being asked questions for hours and hours and hours. I wasn't exactly a bundle of joy, no, but, I still came out and faced the cameras and spoke to everybody because I've got absolutely nothing to hide. I understand you've got a job to do because I've been involved with it for the last 45 years. It's a horrible thing to happen to anybody, but, I'm old enough and ugly enough to know, right, face it and sort it out, which is what I've got to do.
It's talked about your names all over the front pages of the papers. How does it feel?
Well, it's not the first time, and obviously I've been involved with probably as many front pages as anybody in the business.
So this is, as you can hear, the morning after he'd been arrested, and those are his buddies in legacy media that he'd worked with. They were complicit with him in many respects. Look, like it's all very poor Max kind of attitude, really. What does it feel like now to be on the front pages? Well, I've been involved with many front pages, as you know. I'm just got to face it. I just got to deal with it. And it's all very insider stuff that was going on there. Obviously, he denied the charges, said, that. And the way that he dismissed it, it was like, 1977 and everything. Here's my attitude, right? And that is, people have a right certainly up until their death, to nail a predator. That's my attitude. I don't care whether you're on your last day on this earth. If you've abused somebody, you should still be dealt with. That's my attitude. I don't care how long ago it was. I don't believe in the whole idea of historic abuse. Historic abuse, I think, is an expression that has been created to sound dismissive, as if, oh, come on now, it was a different, they always talk about it being a different era then. It's a different era. It was never a different era that it was okay to grope or rape young girls, primarily young girls. Obviously, there were a lot of young boys as well, but the people I'm dealing with here were very focused on young girls for the most part. Anyway, 4 months after that, him in his car, and 4 months after the original charges, and in April 2013, he was charged with a further 11 indecent assaults between 1966 and 1985 on girls and women aged 14 to 19. And he said the allegations are completely false, not at all true. And in May 2013, he pleaded not guilty at Westminster Magistrates Court, and then a hearing took place in the following month in June, and then a date was set for his trial for the 4th of March in the following year. And weeks before his trial, he gave an interview to journalist Simon Hattonstone, who worked for The Guardian. And Simon Hattonstone was, in many respects, very typical of the journalists who had fallen for Max Clifford's shtick. And this is what Simon Hattonstone wrote. A few weeks before the Max Clifford case came to court, I visited him at his home in Surrey. The Guardian hoped to make a film about his trial to be shown at its conclusion, but he declined the request on the grounds that he wasn't the emotional type and wouldn't provide the tears and tantrums he thought we wanted. He gave a pacey run through of the charges he faced. 11 counts of indecent assault against 7 teenage girls aged 14 to 19 between 1966 and 1984. They were all rubbish, he said. It was obvious from one woman's description of his office that she had never been there. Another said that he had abused her in his car at a time when he had no car and hadn't even learned to drive, and on it went. Simon Hattonstone was in no doubt whatsoever that Max Clifford was innocent. And he said, there was one thing I felt confident of. This was an Operation Yewtree fishing expedition. For all his lies and braggadocio, Max Clifford was an innocent man. Simon Hattonstone eventually changed his attitude, but that is very typical of the media. They believed that Operation Yewtree was a witch hunt, a fishing expedition. And in many respects, I was critical about Operation Yewtree because it happened to investigate what had happened with Jimmy Savile and the widespread complicity of royals, politicians, although none of that was ever explored. Obviously, they never explored that. That's why I made paedophiles in Parliament. But to show the complicity of police all around the country, because Jimmy Savile was repeatedly reported, just like Mohammed Al-Fayed was reported, right? But so the trial itself was very interesting. And Max Clifford's involvement with orgies, as one example, came out. He frequently was involved in organising sex parties that also involved British actress Diana Dawes. And in court, the prosecution referred to Clifford as a ringmaster and a control freak. The very words, actually, that he used to describe himself in his memoirs read all about it. And they used the book throughout the trial, absolutely. And they would have been stupid not to, because the book, as I say, for someone who prided himself on hiding secrets, he could be incredibly indiscreet as well. And he came across as this sex-obsessed philanderer, actually, at best. And in his book, he said, I was too greedy to be faithful. Almost anything went, including having 2 girls at a time, having sex with girlfriends' mothers, and watching others have sex. And Clifford admitted that when he'd been married, he'd had 4 long-term relationships while he was in his own marriage. Not a man to trust, right? But he claimed when it came to these sex parties, he was just an obliging host. But the book told a completely different story. He described himself as, I became the ringmaster, a role I like to have in many aspects of my life. The parties became my circus, and various people performed in different ways. Now, these were famous parties, star parties, and it was a haven, a hotbed of blackmail. That was the reality. He was at these parties. He was indulging in his favorite thing, his perversions, and some other famous people. And he was the ringmaster, and he was essentially getting people to perform. Think about that. I wonder who was performing for him. I wonder who. It was quite revealing that later I think his second or third wife, Jo, who he'd been in the lovely properties with, who he'd bought the lovely properties with, she came out. She gave an interview after all the convictions and everything, might even have been after the death. But the interview she gave was just so weird, right? She was talking to Mark Williams Thomas, TV detective, also not an entirely trustworthy individual, not least because he's led people astray to do with the McCann story, and anybody who does that cannot be trusted. But he was talking to Mark Williams Thomas, who gets himself involved in any kind of high profile case because, whatever reason, gatekeeping, ego, who knows. Anyway, so she was talking to Williams Thomas rather. And what she said was that throughout their marriage, Max Clifford kept a black bin bag, and it was a bag full of photographs of women. And some of these, they were sexual photographs, and some of these women had their faces cut out. So let me just get this straight, right? Imagine that. You're married to a man who keeps a black bin liner full of sexual photos of women that he's taken, and some of them have their faces cut out. This sounds like serial murderer stuff, right? Weird stuff, but certainly somebody who sees women purely as sexual objects. Certainly that, at the very least. And she said, I didn't like them being in the house. She said some of them had faces, but a lot of them didn't. They were all sexual photos. And when she was asked, she asked Max Clifford, how did you get all of these? And he said, I used to be able to get women to do whatever I wanted. So all of this is going on in the background while he's fronting as a public relations for the Stars. So there's a lot of blackmailable stuff there, right? And don't forget, he was involved with politicians. So that is the British establishment as well. What was really ironic at his trial was he used the very tool that had been his stock in trade, and he used that for his defense. And so his stock in trade largely had been kind of kiss and tell, this whole idea, let's kiss and tell on, John Major's cabinet as one example, because they're hypocrites about family values and everything. So he'd used the whole kiss and tell, huge purveyor of it, had been paid a fortune for selling kiss and tell stories to the tabloids, but he also used that in his defense. He said that these women who accused him of being an abuser, there could only be one motive. He said the promise of publicity and money. And, he kind of reasoned that nobody understood the world of kiss and tell better than he did. And as far as he was concerned when he was on trial, it wasn't a question of whether he would be cleared. It was just like when, right? Even on trial, he struggled to believe that they could find him guilty. And but on the 28th of April, 2014, he was convicted of 8 counts of indecent assault. And as you can imagine, bit of a shocker for somebody like him. I think all of these kind of famous predators were all shocked because they knew how many people were complicit in the lie, including, bent cops and various other people. But anyway, April 2014, he was convicted of 8 counts of indecent assault against 4 victims at Southwark Crown Court. He was acquitted of 2 charges of indecent assault, and the jury failed to reach a verdict on another charge. And in the dock, he presented many faces. It was quite revealing. I spoke to one person who was there, a court reporter, and she said to me that at one stage he kind of presented himself as a loving father, and then he was like this angry, caged control freak who, with this kind of victim mentality, who turned his head to stare at a hostile witness when they left court. And then there were other times when he was like winking at friends in court who had given him good character witness statements. So it was really weird. And it was also observed that most of the women who testified against him by this point were around 50. They were well spoken. Apparently they were very similar, like physically, immaculately turned out, beautiful. The kind of like the idea was that they were former models, and all had been teenagers when Clifford had told them that he could arrange for them to meet various, his famous clients, whoever they were, or told them that they could star in Dynasty, or told them that they could star in the next James Bond film. We only have to look at some of those James Bond films, and you can see, even from the costumes that the women have to wear, probably what they would have had to have gone through in order to be able to get those roles, right? And in court, we heard from women now, but they were children then, about how they'd been abused in his office, in his toilets, in his car, in a cab, and on holiday, and in a jacuzzi. There were discrepancies, by the way. Of course there would be, because with the passage of time, our memory is not always as great as it should be. And that's one of the reasons why they find it easy to dismiss what they call historic abuse claims. Okay. But I would argue that anybody who's been abused remembers being abused, and remembers it with some clarity. And I speak from experience. But there were discrepancies, like, what has previously been said, like he argued with Simon Hattonstone. There were one woman described his office. It didn't actually look like his office at all. But again, that could be an easier mistake, because it's traumatizing to be abused. If you're 14 years old and being abused, you're not necessarily going to remember all the details of what an office looks like. And I think some of these things are never taken into account, really. There was also this really weird issue in court about the size of his appendage, shall we say. And at one stage it was claimed that it was tiny, and at another stage it was claimed that it was really large. And it was just kind of like, it was horrible. And like reading, court notes and everything, it's horrible, because it was almost made into something humorous, something really horrible and disgusting. Because bear in mind, even though he's only in the dock for his own abuse, this is a man who has already covered up multiple abusers, people who are still walking around today. He was sentenced on the 2nd of May, 2014, to a total of 8 years in prison. And Judge Leonard, who sentenced him, said that he should serve at least half his sentence. And he actually said, which is quite an unprecedented comment, he actually said that he was sure Clifford had also assaulted a 12-year-old girl in Spain, although this charge could not be pursued in the British courts. And the judge also said that if the offences had taken place after the law was changed in 2003, several of those offences would be for rape. So also bear in mind, what they call so-called historic abuse is being charged under a system and under a law that wasn't protecting young people. Okay, but after 2003, what Clifford was doing would have gone down as rape. But before that, it wasn't. It was indecent assault. Terrible. Indecent assault always sounds like it's minimalizing, right? It feels like that to me. It was horrible. Revelations in court were just horrible. One of his victims, who was 15, said that it just put her off of having relationships. She was unable to have relationships. And that is what happened. And then the judge concluded that Clifford had caused an additional element of trauma to his victims by his contemptuous attitude during the trial. And this is an interesting comment in the judgment, because what it actually talks about is not only about Clifford's abuse, but what Clifford would say to them. And the judge noted that once Clifford had abused these young girls, he would then say to them something like, "No one is going to believe you." And I 100% believe that was said. 100%. Because I've had something similar said to me in the music industry, right? And that is what rich, powerful, famous people say. No one's going to believe you. Against me, I'm Max Clifford. I'm Max Clifford. I represent huge, huge names. I'm associated with them. And the judgment noted that. Judgment noted that he was untouchable because he was a dominant character. I'm going to read it actually. I judge that the reason why they were not brought to light sooner is because of your own dominant character and your position in the world of entertainment, which meant that your victims thought you were untouchable. Something I judge that you two believed and traded upon. Absolutely, unquestionably, 100%. He thought he was untouchable. And he compounded the misery of his victims on sentencing day by saying he stood by everything he had said. And what was interesting was when he came out of court, I think this is really telling. Video is still available online. I'm not going to show it, but video is still available online. There's no reason I'm not going to show it other than I haven't copied it. But the video is still available online when he comes out. And he comes out and he's just been found guilty. And he's now faced with the very same paparazzi who he's always had in his pocket for a very, very long time. And he comes out and says, my lawyers have said I'm not to say anything. And he just stands there. Now, you don't, found guilty or innocent, you don't have to come out and stand there for the cameras for them to get their shots. But because he was a media man, it was like a message to his friends. I think that the silence there, when he stood there, and the silence was palpable, and he had his daughter Louise by the side of him, and the silence was palpable. And I think that was for several reasons. One, he had been told not to say anything anyway, he'd just been found guilty. But he didn't need to go and stand in front of the press, but it was a message. One, it was a message, I think, that I've protected you to the people that he'd protected in this. And that would have included at least Mohammed Al-Fayed and goodness knows who else. But I think that was like a show of, I'm taking it. I'm taking the rap for us all. You're safe. But also a kind of like a final gesture to the media, which he had dominated for decades. On the 7th of November 2014, his appeal was rejected by the Court of Appeal. The court ruled the sentence handed to him was justified and correct. He was arrested again in 2015, charged and then cleared. And it was reported in March 2015 that it was Operation U-Tree again that had arrested him. And he pleaded not guilty. And then in October of that year, 2015, he was cleared by a jury of the charge. No, he pleaded not guilty in October. And then the following year in 2016, he was cleared by a jury of not being guilty. So he certainly won one. He won one. And before his death, it should be noted that he had won the right to challenge his conviction at the Court of Appeal, and his daughter Louise continued to challenge his convictions even after his death. And in 2019, the conviction was ultimately upheld by the Court of Appeal, which comprehensively rejected his appeal on all grounds, which is quite unusual, isn't it? That posthumously, he's gone, his daughter still wants him cleared. Well, his daughter was a publicist. And she formed her own public relations company because she obviously couldn't carry on trading on the name Max Clifford. So she formed her own public relations company called Born. But his daughter was a publicist, and his daughter was his daughter. And many children struggle to believe that their parents are abusers, and fair dues. I can't say that she did know that. And I can understand why she would want to have her father's name clear, but I don't for a second believe that it wasn't also business related, because his name was obviously trash. And so there was no value in Max Clifford Associates once he was convicted of being a predator. And, the fact is what the judge had said still stood, and actually not the judge, but the prosecutor at his main trial said that he used his contact with famous people to bully and manipulate these young people into sexual acts with him. And that is what he did. And I'm in no doubt about that whatsoever. And, as I say, despite being a concealer of very big secrets, he could be shockingly indiscreet. And in court, he had no problem in describing what he did as something of a protection racket. It was very weird. He was saying that essentially that by keeping stories out of the news, what he would do is if there was a victim, he would go to the person, the predator, the perpetrator, get money for the girl, and they'd keep it out of the newspapers together. That went on for decades. And he admitted that in court. He admitted that in court. I mean, it's quite astonishing. Other times he kind of like was prepared to accept that he was a pimp. He said sexual procuring had never bothered. I'm going to quote him directly, actually. Sexual procuring has never bothered me as long as the people involved have been old enough to know what they're doing. Yeah, but there's another time when he talks about you don't ask for their birth certificates. They didn't care about the age of these young girls that were going in to be abused. And his book boasts all about the idea that he provided a safe environment in which his clients could indulge their perversions. Those perversions almost certainly included children. And what was interesting, of course, it was with a big mouth like him, was that this is his book. And much of what he tried to claim in court was actually contradicted by what he'd already written. He insisted that he would never exploit women sexually or take photographs of them topless for a kick. But we know that's a lie because his wife said he had a bin bag full of women in sexual positions, some with their faces cut out. But again, whatever he was saying in court, it wasn't matched up by what was said in his memoir. And he boasted as one example of a bet that he had with Freddie Starr, the man that he'd made the original headline up for. And the bet that he had with Freddie Starr, who was also another Operation U-Tree arrest, by the way, he had a bet with Freddie Starr that he could make the first woman he stopped in the street come to his office and agree to a revealing and topless photo. And he won. They managed to get a traffic warden up to Max Clifford's office, who happily took off her top and told him she wanted a career in TV. This is the kind of stuff that these creeps love doing. Anyway, he spent his final days in HMP Little Hay. Now, this is another interesting thing, right? HMP Little Hay, by the way, is a sex offenders prison for men in near Huntingdon in Cambridgeshire. And here's what's interesting. There was another time when Little Hay came to public attention. And I feel this is interesting, which is why I'm going to raise up to your awareness. Here it is. Look at this headline. Interesting headline. Sex offender 84 becomes first prisoner to die after contracting coronavirus. This was actually the 25th of March, 2020. This is in the same week that lockdown commenced in the UK and the absolutely reprehensible draconian Coronavirus Act came into effect. And the first prisoner to apparently die of coronavirus was at Little Hay. And I always think those sort of things are interesting. Stories that make national and international news. What is that about? But that was the prison that Max Clifford was at. So yes, and then it went on to have a second sex offender who apparently died of coronavirus. But you know what I think about all of that. Not much of it I can say on YouTube because of their medical misinformation policy. But other than what a load of bunkum. And so, yes, he was in HMP Little Hay. And so it's interesting because one of the last people who actually saw him and interviewed him was Simon Hattonston, again, the journalist who had originally believed that he was innocent. And Simon Hattonston saw him in the August, and he died in December 2017. And Simon Hattonston had seen him in the August 2017. He said he just didn't recognize him. He just wasn't the same person. He was like, basically, the description was he was like a shadow of himself. When Simon had seen him in court, he was overweight, he was exhausted, and for all his bluster, though, he was beaten, really. And that was the reality, because what a come down. What a come down. You're like king of the world. And knowing that you're keeping all of these secrets, all these heinous secrets for very, very famous people, and being paid a ton load of money to do it. And then you are convicted and you are reduced to spending your last days in a prison, by the way, that after his death was later ruled during the time that he was there to have standards below decency. Max Clifford collapsed at Little Hay prison after complaining of poor conditions. And what come down for him from the riches of Burwood Park and London nightlife, and the riches and the privilege he had enjoyed. And there was an annual report into HMP Little Hay, which, as I say, covered the period that Max Clifford was there. And it stated that it suffered from a lack of long-term investment and had been blighted by maintenance issues, and that a cash injection from the prison service was urgently required. Among the shortcomings highlighted by the report were issues with hot water, heating and washing and drying facilities, with disproportionate staff time apparently swallowed by maintenance issues. And Max's daughter, Louise Clifford, we've mentioned her a few times, so let's bring her in now, shall we? His daughter had, and again, I'm not blaming the daughter for the sins of the father, not doing that at all. And she obviously wanted very much to defend her father. Here she is with him. And this is somebody who herself has been blighted all her life and disabled because of very youthful arthritis that she'd had from the age of 7. But what she said was that she told a pre-inquest review that while she accepted her father died of natural causes, problems at the prison, I'm going to quote her, exacerbated his condition. She said, being cold, lack of heating, the shock of the shower. He complained for weeks and weeks to me that it was becoming impossible to shower adequately. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't find it in me to feel sorry for a bunch of sex predators having to endure cold showers for the rest of their rotten, miserable lives. I don't have a problem with that. Not at all. And what? Freeze to death, you mofos. That's my attitude, frankly. Right. But all of it, very interesting. He actually died on the 7th of December, 2017. He collapsed after trying to clean his cell. He was taken to Hitchinbrook Hospital near Huntingdon in Cambridgeshire. He died of a heart attack 3 days later on the 10th of December. He was 74. The inquest into his death heard that medical evidence of his poor health led up to his death. And on the 18th of December 2019, the coroner ruled that he died of natural causes. But I think probably natural causes that were, as his daughter said, exacerbated by the rotten prison conditions. And I don't care. I don't care. And what? Right? Let them all freeze there. I'd do far more with sex offenders than just submit them to some cold showers. Far, far more. And I think that it's really important when we're reflecting on all of this, not to forget the complicity of legacy media throughout all of this. Clifford's abuse, covering from predators. We cannot forget the complicity of legacy media, not just in buying and concocting his stories, but in concealing predators, including him. I'm fairly certain people knew what was going on, right? I'm fairly certain that he would have parted with some editors, some journalists at his sex parties when he was the ringleader. He probably had all manner of things on people. And that's how they do it. That's how they keep it hidden for a very, very long time. And I think this book is interesting in itself. You can see, you might not be able to see there, but it's co-written with Media Harridan, Angela Levine. She spends most of her time these days telling royal tittle-tattle about Harry and Meghan. She's a horrible woman, horrible. And there's also an endorsement on the front cover from Piers Morgan. You know, the thing is, Clifford was one of theirs. I'm not suggesting that Morgan and Levine knew what was going on, but in terms of legacy media, Max Clifford was one of theirs. And in many respects, one of the reasons I wanted to do today is because he's been consigned to history as if his influence no longer has any standing. Well, that's bunkum. Because my question is, does his legacy live on? And my answer is yes, absolutely. Clifford was really affable, as you see, when he was chatting so casually after being charged with sex offences. He was chatting so casually with the paparazzi because they were his buddies. He'd used them for many years, probably slipped them a bit of money here to, you know, rock up outside a nightclub to catch this person coming out of a nightclub so they could get into the tabloids, all of that stuff. You know, ask people like Dan Wootton. They knew how the whole system worked, how, you know, tabloid editors. Dan Wootton was a celebrity tabloid editor. They knew how the whole system worked. They were always being told when people were coming out of nightclubs so that they could then send photographers and act as if these people were just kind of like caught on the hoof coming out of clubs and everything. It was always set up, all big setup. It's been known for a very, very long time. But the thing is that the reference that that Max Clifford made earlier when talking to Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby was ask Carol, she knows, right? And everyone but the viewer knew what was going on in terms of media complicity and media lies. And again, I'm not accusing Carol Malone, as repugnant as she is, but I'm not accusing her of knowing about the abuse of people or being involved in the cover-up of it. I'm not, because I understand defamation laws in the UK. But there is no doubt whatsoever that Max Clifford hid other people's secrets and he protected other predators. And this is another example that I want to play you. I think this is an important one as well. If I can find it, this is where he was actually giving an interview to Sky News. Actually, before I do that, let me play what he said about Carol Malone. So he says, ask Carol, she knows. So hear this. Here's what Carol Malone has to say in response to ask Carol, she knows. And bear in mind, Max Clifford was talking about the fact that Tom Boyer, the author, had access to Simon Cowell that Max Clifford didn't like and come out with this book and put out this piddling nonsense about Simon Cowell and Danny Minogue. I mean, if there was ever a distraction story, that was it, right? But this is what Carol Malone had to say.
Everything Max says is true, you know. He spent years protecting him. He's played this game with him for years, with the press. He's kept him out of the press when Carol wanted to be. He's put him in it when he wanted to be. And now to pretend that by some naive accident this has all just come out.
Simon Cowell is a genius.
Yes.
He knows exactly what he's doing. Exactly. It's in the papers. He's had sex with some really beautiful women. Oh, and he's got a TV show at the moment, has he?
Isn't that funny?
Fantastic. Wonderful. He's winning. Of course he's winning.
Yes. And I don't know. I just think I do. Max is right. It's a game. It's all a game.
Thank you both.
And Simon Cowell won't lose it, be sure of that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And Max is right. It's all a game. And Simon Cowell won't lose. You can be sure of that, or thereabouts, she said. So what they did was he repeatedly fed this idea, by the way, that Simon Cowell was constantly surrounded by beautiful women. So the Danny Minogue story was not a problem for them, not at all. The question is, what was it really concealing, right? What was it really distracting people away from? And, the thing about Clifford is he repeatedly let people know that he knew stuff. And here's another one that I want to play for you, actually, because, again, I think it's really important to know that this was all in plain sight. They never hid it. Let me find it. This was him. Oh, what's that? Clifford, pervs come to him. Yes, there we go. This was him. So this was in the wake of Operation Yewtree, ironically, which nailed him eventually. And Max Clifford is giving an interview to Sky News about the impact this is having. Listen to this. I just find it astonishing that all this stuff has been in plain sight. Absolutely in plain sight. Listen to this. Here he is. Oh, is that not coming up? That is a pity. Why is that? That's weird. No, that's a shame. That's a shame you can't hear that because actually what he's saying, I'm going to have to now paraphrase what he said, unless I have another one that I've also recorded like that. What he's saying is people are coming to him and they're really scared that what they've done may get out now, that Operation Yewtree is now interested in busting all these entertainers. And Max Clifford admits in that Sky interview, and it's available online, so even though it's not playing here, it's available online, you can find it. He admits that he has people coming to him who are worried. And in that interview, he says, well, you don't ask for their birth certificates, do you? And honestly, it's weird because I remember watching that interview for the first time. And at the time, this was obviously before Max Clifford had been charged with anything. At the time, I thought he's talking about himself. He's talking about himself. You don't ask for birth certificates. If there's ever any doubt, right, that a birth certificate is an issue with somebody that you're about to have some sort of involvement with, then perhaps you shouldn't have and involvement with them. So he absolutely did suppress bad stories. And a lot of the time he made out that it was to do with charity. And it all becomes a bit surreal, really. And also what I want to say, that interview, by the way, was with Stephen Dixon at Sky News. And I'm sorry it's not playing. And I don't understand why it's not playing, because it's a pity, because it's actually vital, because what he was saying was that these predators are coming to him and they're scared because they've done bad things. Well, who was he talking about? And are they still walking around knowing they have abused young girls or young boys and got away with it? I would say yes. I would suggest yes, because absolutely we are in no doubt whatsoever. He's been caught enough times now admitting he lied. This is another time as well, as part of the interview when he was talking about Alan Clark, where he admits suppressing.
I write the book. I write the funny stories one day, but because I don't want to harm, it's never been my nature.
That's also the defamation risk, unless you have...
No, that's easy for me, because I've got all the evidence. I'm the one that's hidden it from the world. I know where everything is and where all the evidence is.
Where do you keep it? I mean,
something very safe.
That's not in the cupboard.
No, it's a long way from here, I can promise you. But you see my point, and that's why I have such a good relationship with the people like that, because 10, 20, 30 years go by and no one in the world knows. And I could have retired on one of these things. Whether it was any of the people.
Look at that. He said, I'll never write the book. What he means is like the tell-all book about all of these predators that he was protecting. I'm just interested in the funny stuff. So the lies, like Freddie Starr at my hamster, right? I'm just interested in the funny stuff because, and what he's talking about there, he's like, it will do harm. What harm to the predators to reveal them? Yeah, he did. It would harm the predators, it would harm his business. It would harm the money that he was taking from them for his charitable concerns. And he's very clearly saying there that he's got the evidence. He couldn't be done for defamation because he knows where the bodies are hidden. And he said, 20, 30 years goes past, nothing done. There are people still around today who need to be felt, need to have their collars felt. We know it. We know it. I'm sure some of you are aware of some of the people that I may or may not be suggesting here right now. So he did absolutely suppress bad stories for financial support, be that to his business, be that to charities. It is the Jimmy Savile approach. It makes him look like a saint while covering up his demonic behavior. And I mean, that is what he did. He admitted that, he knew where the bodies were hidden. So he had that's not somebody with a conscience, is it? Because what is the point in raising money for charities for children, but you are allowing children to be abused? So it's a really weird state of affairs, really. And the court judgment also noted about his charities, by the way. I'm going to read directly from it. It says, a number of charity workers have spoken highly of your dedicated work to raise funds for the charities and the real concern you showed for patients and staff alike. Well, yes, so did Jimmy Savile, when he was getting the key to a morgue so he could go and rape dead bodies. Yeah. Lots of people around said, oh, I was such a good lad, such a good person. The judgment goes on saying, although your charitable work has gone on long after your offending ceased, I cannot ignore that for decades you were leading a double existence. I'm not convinced offending ceases, actually. I just think that it's highly likely there were still more victims who just didn't want to come forward, because whoever came forward, that's the tip of the iceberg. And the judgment goes on to say the care which you showed to those in the hospices and to your own daughter was not shown to the 15-year-old, the subject of counts 3 to 6, or in my judgment, to the 12-year-old who you abused whilst on holiday. That, my point exactly, is that he didn't have care and concern for children in general, but really just his own daughter, right? He was a virtue signaling predator. And the charity enabled him to throw people off the scent. And like Jimmy Savile, he talked endlessly about the various charities that he was involved with, which he was a patron of, the children's hospices and the cancer hospitals. Again, like Jimmy Savile, very similar charities. I mean, because how emotive is that? Children's hospices and cancer hospitals. This is very, very emotive stuff to raise funds for, right? And, it's all so bloody typical. And the whole thing about his daughter, again, felt very sorry for his daughter. But if you look, he traded on this whole idea that he never saw any media attention for his daughter. Well, that's a lie, because that picture on the wall, you might not be able to see it, right? And it's actually of him and his daughter, and it's about the one story that Max Clifford, never wanted to be paid for or whatever, but he got loads and loads and loads of media attention. And what it enabled was people to feel sorry for him via his disabled daughter. And I felt sorry for him, because who doesn't, right? As a human being, you're like, oh my God, that must be so awful that your daughter has been ill since the age of 7. But he used his daughter. Sadly, Louise Clifford died in 2023. She died after a cancer battle. And I did always feel sorry for her, because you can't decide who your loved ones are, who your family is, right? And oftentimes your loved ones are the last to know who you really are and what you're really about. And but he absolutely traded and used his daughter's sickness in order to create an air of sympathy around himself. That is what he did. So I think in the round, what I really wanted to say today is that even though Max Clifford is long dead, his legacy lives on. And I am deeply, deeply concerned that, as I've said repeatedly throughout this, that there are people walking around today who should be up in a dock. Max Clifford was absolutely a sexual abuser of girls and young women, and he protected sexual abusers who used fame and money to silence victims. That's what he did. And he shaped British media for years with sexual scandals and made up stories, and that legacy absolutely continues, and not least because many of the people who were involved in concocting these false stories with him are still in media. They're still there, right? And I'm in no doubt whatsoever that some of the predators he was protecting, some are dead, but some are still alive. It's not over. He had admitted to protecting people who didn't ask for birth certificates. And I think that I, as an investigative journalist who certainly looks into establishment abuse, I think I saw it as my duty. I actually fell upon doing this. I was going through some old files and I came across a picture of him with one of his clients. And I was like, yeah, that Max Clifford with a dodgy one right there. And it just kind of triggered me. And I was like, I'm not sure that we're really free from the predators that he was protecting. Not at all. So Max Clifford may be dead. He might not, by the way. He could have been, he may be dead. So, but saying that, he could have been Epstein. It is highly likely that he didn't necessarily die of natural causes. Again, like Epstein, a gatekeeper, he had a lot of information on really perverse and predatory famous people. He could have been Epstein. 100% of that, I'm in no doubt whatsoever. That's not impossible. He knew too much. He absolutely did. Either way, Max Clifford represents a time in British media that should shame us all. The sad thing is it's still here. It is still here. Tabloid newspapers still cover up important stories and they spread nonsense and lies. Max Clifford came from nothing, returned to nothing, and left a legacy of abuse and cover-ups in his wake. And I hope, before I step off this mortal coil, that at least one of those predators that Max Clifford protected is held to account. So I just wanted to say all that. And again, like Epstein, like many people imagine, he could still be alive. Clifford could still be alive. He could have been taken elsewhere, right, for protection. Any of these things are possible. When you deal with the level of corruption that I deal with, you have to allow for any of these things because they've been lying to us for so long. So that's what I wanted to say today, really. And now I'm going to look at some of your comments. Shug said, I get the feeling he didn't take the appropriate precautions and was tucked away where no one could hear him. You're welcome, Shin. You're welcome. That's true, Elaine. Savile was not allowed to take part in Red Nose Day because the director of Red Nose Day, which obviously is a BBC charity, had said, keep Savile away from this. They knew. How many MPs were arrested during Operation Yewtree? Asks Maria. Maria, you're having a laugh, right? You're having a laugh. The only MP that I can think of who's ever been done was Eric Joyce. Eric Joyce, disgusting Labour MP, who was eventually done. He'd kept for 7 years a video where children as young as, I think, like 7 months old were being, you know, raped. Or I can't even bear to say it. Horrible stuff. And Stephen, you're absolutely right. And I can't believe any official narratives anymore. And King said, Clifford is working with Elvis down my local chip shop. There you go. Markson says, I hope a few, Sonia, that we're going to bang up some few more predators. Not at all, KR. You're very welcome. Millicent, I'm more than happy to do it. Millicent said, thank you. Thank goodness for your bravery exposing these predators. Happy to do it, people. And Merce said, thank you, Sonia. You have confirmed what I thought about him all along when he was constantly in the media. Yes, an absolute creepy individual who was protected by the people all around him. And Rachel, that's an intro. I just want to refer to Cowell briefly, Simon Cowell, because remember, and I think this was very much part of what Clifford did with him. Do you remember that whole thing during the kind of 90s and 2000s where Simon Cowell always seemed to have all his ex-girlfriends accompany him when he went places, right? And it made it look like he was a great geezer that all his ex-girlfriends loved and everything. Do you remember all that setup and everything? Well, I think it's because his ex-girlfriends knew what was what. And a lot of his ex-girlfriends were desperate for fame as well, by the way. So thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Roughneck. I am going to leave you now. I will be back on Monday for our live news show. Great show coming up on Monday. We're going to be talking to Andrew Loney about his new book on Prince Andrew. And we're going to be talking to whistleblower Stephanie Davis about Lucy Letby, as well as all the news from the past week we'll be reflecting on, as well as looking at the upcoming news. Thank you. I love you too. Listen, have a fantastic, fantastic weekend. And I will see you on Monday. Thank you for being here and for being such a fantastically supportive audience. Love you to bits. Thank you, King. And thank you, Trevor. And thank you, Randy. And thank you, Rachel. Thank you all. Take good care of yourself. See you Monday, people. And thank you for the super chat. Lots of love to you.